Good morning, everybody. So I hope you're feeling well and had a lovely bank holiday weekend. Although right now it's looking a bit grey and cloudy, which kind of feels apt because actually today I wanted to talk a bit about bringing a bit more fun and joy into your teaching. And this is something that's come up for me from time to time and something I wanted to talk about because I'm just aware that sometimes, even when we're not thinking about cancer, just being a yoga teacher can be a very serious and earnest affair. And there's lots of reasons why over time we might find that some of the joy starts to seep out a little bit. I think partly this can be perhaps coming internally when we're really conscious of wanting to do a really good job. And so we might agonize over lesson planning, making sure that it's perfect, trying to cover all the bases and maybe just over analyzing a little bit. And that can take a lot of time. And then we can perhaps generate stress about not having time for other things, or maybe just getting to a point where we're second guessing ourselves so much that you start to lose confidence or losing the ability to have some genuine clarity about whether our plan is good enough. So that's one area that can start to make things feel a little bit less fun. It may also be that we're trying to be the best yoga teacher possible, and particularly when we're working with cancer or serious illness, there may be something about really wanting to be sensitive in class. And obviously on the course we talk a lot about appropriate language and teaching cues and not re-traumatizing people and being sensitive. But at the same time, there is still space for some fun or some comedy, some lightheartedness. But sometimes we can be so caught in really not wanting to offend or upset anybody that maybe it just brings us in with a bit of a heavy heart or a bit of nervousness or being really self-censoring. And again, that just starts to eat away at that kind of free flow, responsive joyfulness that we could have as a teacher. And I do notice that there's a lot of criticism within our industry. And just this morning, I was nearly late because I did that classic thing of getting sucked into some Facebook thread. But it was just interesting and very apt for today's talk about how judgmental it is. And actually, if you don't have a really strong level of resilience, or if you're on a vulnerable day, some of that stuff can really get under your skin when maybe you have experienced teachers shouting a bit about what is real yoga or what good yoga teachers are supposed to be like. I see posts around which are perhaps a bit clickbaity, but it's like, if you do this, then you're traumatizing your students, or if you say this, this is cultural appropriation, or if you do that. And there's definitely points to be made about all of these things, but sometimes the way that it can come over in social media in these not very nuanced, very short, kind of snappy things, and then people pile in with their comments. And none of it feels like very yogic to me, I have to say. But if we get caught up in that, in some of these arguments, again, it can be very undermining to your confidence as a teacher, to your self-esteem. It can, again, make you second guess where you thought you're teaching the way that you were taught, and you've been quite conscientious, and you're doing all the things, and then suddenly there's this raging argument which sort of implies that maybe everything you're doing is completely wrong and evil. These things, they suck the joy out of being a yoga teacher. And so that can lead into that fear of criticism, fear of being judged, fear of getting it horribly wrong. And again, sort of talk about this self-censorship as well. All of these things can just start to make you feel very nervous as a teacher, or perhaps feel like you have to damp down parts of your personality, that maybe there's whole areas that you're not allowed to talk about. And so when we kind of are in that fearful state, the energy of that is not great. It can be quite heavy and sticky or ungrounded. And it doesn't, like I say, it doesn't give you the experience of feeling kind of happy in your own skin, really grounded and rooted in your practice, with a level of confidence balanced with humility, that sense of exploration, the permission to make mistakes. All of these things, just for me, they just kind of suck the joy out of your job. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to raise that as a potential issue. I don't know, perhaps some of these things are resonating with you today. But there's, like with anything, it's always finding the balance between being professional, being sensitive, being compassionate, preparing sufficiently. There's all of these standards of being professional. And I might actually invite you to perhaps brainstorm a few things for yourself of, some bullet points about what does it mean to be professional as a yoga teacher. And maybe this can just be something that's a little bit of a sanity check when you have those wobbles and those moments where you just might feel like, oh my God, am I doing everything wrong? Am I the world's worst yoga teacher? That when you check in with these things of, where did you do your initial training? Like, are you properly trained and qualified? How long have you been teaching? Do you give some thought to your lesson plans? All of these things. Are you doing some regular CPD or personal development? What's the feedback like from your students in class? So again, it's not that we should be closed to all criticism and feedback. But I think just having a strong foundation of, what's reasonable, what's acceptable, so that we can deal with that side of things, so that we're not paralyzed by fear of criticism or perfectionism, or those ideas of not being good enough. And just remembering that we're always a work in progress. We're always learning, we're always growing, we're always developing. And part of learning and growing and developing is making mistakes. Like, you try something and maybe it's not the best, and then you refine it, but safe in the knowledge that, as a properly trained and qualified yoga teacher who's given some thought to what they're teaching, that if it doesn't go exactly the way you want, or if a class falls a bit flat, it's not that you've done anything awful or dangerous. You know, you're just experimenting maybe with a slightly different sequence, or you try a new reading, or you're trying a slightly different style. You can, you know, and perhaps enroll your students in that, you know, in that co-creation of a class. So, you know, checking in with yourself about if you're feeling you're not like completely in love with your job right now, if you're feeling a bit flat in yourself, is that maybe coming from your own inner critic about, you know, if you have a tendency towards perfectionism, or is it more coming from external sources, and that you have a fear of being judged and criticized by others? So again, it might be just come off social media for a bit, and, you know, go back to your teaching notes and your books and those things, and get some reassurance from there. And it may also be, again, if you're working with cancer, it may be something around feeling like those classes have to be ultra sensitive, and yeah, maybe there's like an element of seriousness and somberness kind of required in the class, because people are going through something incredibly difficult. They're most likely experience some degree of trauma. And so there can be this feeling that's, you know, almost slightly, I don't know, funereal is the word coming to mind, you know, like the hushed tones, and we shouldn't be laughing in here, and we have to be respectful, and it's all kind of soft and gentle. And that can be appropriate at times. But also, I think it's really important sometimes to have a bit of lightness and a bit of humor in class. So I also today wanted to bring in some ideas around what do we do if we're kind of feeling a bit stuck in that area of, like, you know, maybe the light in our teaching is dimmed a little bit. So it's a few ideas that I sketched out, and there may be other things that come to mind for you. So these aren't the only things. But first of all, you know, if you are that person who's agonizing over lesson plans and spending an awful lot of time writing and rewriting and trying to write a script for all your cues, I would invite you to try planning less, and spend a bit of time before the class getting really grounded, maybe doing some breathing practice, setting the room, see if it's possible for you to be in the space before your students arrive, and actually maybe having a theme that you want to work with, or a few key poses that you want to teach, and respond to the room, and try planning a little bit less, like maybe just sketch out loosely what you want to do, and practice having faith in yourself that you know this stuff, and that to be a bit more responsive in the moment. Because actually, the more we try and stick to a pre-written script, even if it's our own, and trying to remember, oh, what was it I was supposed to do next? Like, our energy and our focus is on the plan and on the script. And there's the panic about getting your lines wrong, you know, a kind of stage fright. Whereas when you're more present in yourself and more responsive in the room, and you're looking around, and maybe asking your students, you know, make the class together and say, you know, today I was thinking we could focus on, you know, some balancing. How does that feel, everyone? Are you okay with that? Like, or, you know, sometimes taking requests, like, what's going on for you right now? What do you want to focus on? And that's more and more how I teach my cancer classes anyway, because you can make the most perfect plan and then people rock up to class and I can just feel the energy in the room is not what I intended to teach that day. And so I just have to chuck it out and start from scratch anyway. So knowing what I find useful is if you know short sequences of particular warm-up moves that are useful, say for forward bends or warm-up practices to prepare for balancing. When you have these little short sequences memorized, then it's easier to fit them together to make a class on the fly. So it's not just starting with a completely blank slate, but if everyone's saying, oh, right now I'm really exhausted, I've got a lot of neck and back stuff going on, then I can think of, oh, I've got a few short sequences that are good when people are fatigued or when people are feeling, stiff and achy, and you can sequence stuff together. Now, I know for some people, it probably fills you with a horror to be that on the spot because you like to be more prepared. But see, is there a way of sometimes trying out what it's like with a slightly looser plan and responding in the room? And maybe that's something you do once a month or once a term, and be really honest with your students and say, right, everybody, I haven't planned a class today. I want to ask you, what would you like to practice that we've done in the last, maybe make it a little bit more workshoppy and a bit more feedback. And that just shakes things up a little bit, and it might make it a bit more fun for your students to have a change of format once in a while, and it'll be a good experience for you to try something where you haven't tightly planned every section of the class. So that's something that I really think is worth trying. I think also thinking about our language, and again, it is one thing, and it is really important to be sensitive with our language and our teaching cues. And again, it's something I talk a lot about in the training, about not using language that makes people feel like they're somehow lesser or an invalid because they have cancer. But there is also plenty of space to bring in a little bit of humor into your cues and being a little bit jokey from time to time. And again, you can't really pre-script this, but if it's something that comes to mind, or if you notice lots of people perhaps not following your instructions quite correctly, like they're lifting the wrong arm or leg or whatever, then it's fine to be a bit jokey about, getting your lefts and rights muddled up, or, just bringing a little bit of lightheartedness into the area. And this is something that I notice emergency services are very good at. They're very sensitive to people, but they're also aware that when somebody is in a dangerous situation, they've had a traumatic injury. Over the years, I suppose I have, as a first aider, when you see like a traffic accident, then sometimes you're there and they see the ambulances when they come, and often the way they talk to people, it's quite light-hearted, because they know actually it's really important to help people not panic, and to play down maybe the seriousness of what's going on without ignoring the reality of what's going on, and without being in denial about anything. But they will use quite light-hearted language, and I see how they make people kind of smile or laugh a bit, and it breaks tension, and it gives people a sense of relief, and there's something normalizing about being able to see perhaps the funny side of something, even when someone's, you know, lying there in a neck brace on a stretcher. You'd think that's really inappropriate to make a joke, but there is something that I've seen, you know, with emergency services, that they have just the right pitch. And I think that's something that we can bring into our teaching as well, like just allowing a little bit of lightheartedness that breaks the tension a little bit, and that we know the power of comedy as well, the power of laughter, and how that changes the chemistry in your body, how it changes the hormonal balance in the body. And, you know, this is something that, you know, they talk about gallows humor. And I have to say, quite often my students are the ones who are cracking jokes as well in class. So I find that they're quite up for a bit of humor, because, you know, all the hospital stuff is just not fun. And so if they can come to a yoga class and crack a few inappropriate jokes with each other, about losing their hair or having to inject themselves, or, you know, how food tastes funny, or that their feet are numb, or whatever. I think the more that you work in this field and you find the right pitch, that that it's really helpful actually to bring a little bit of humor into class. And also then it's a bit more helpful as a teacher, that you don't feel like you're in this kind of funereal atmosphere where it's like, oh God, you better not make a joke. And actually you can be yourself a little bit more, and, you know, you can, and again, it frees up. There's something about the fluidity and the flow of energy that's really important. So again, not sitting at home agonizing about trying to write jokes. We're not supposed to be professional comedians. But, you know, just sometimes even ourselves being able to laugh, or maybe laughing at yourself in class, you know, that, you know, occasionally I might notice that hardly anyone in the room is doing what I was trying to get them to do. And so I'll have a laugh at that and saying, oh, okay, I must just be, you know, off my teaching cues today, because clearly I'm not giving the right instructions. And sort of do it in a light-hearted way that still keeps you in control of the class. But yeah, just letting things be a little bit looser, like not getting tighter and tighter and feeling like, oh, this isn't going the way that I wanted to, and maybe I'm doing a really bad job as a teacher because, yeah, nobody's doing quite what I've asked. And those are like, I've had those trains of thoughts in the past, and I know it doesn't help. I know where that goes. So for me, and it's nerve-wracking at first, and it took me some time to test out gently, gradually, little comments here and there that were a little bit more lighthearted, and then just seeing like the relief in the room, actually. That, and again, I talk about this on the training a lot, that we, you know, the energy that we bring in is really powerful to the people in the room. So if we are able to come in very grounded and confident in a healthy way, and able to, you know, laugh at ourselves, not be so tightly wound about things, that energy is spread to the room. And again, there's this balancing act, and it is quite a skill to hold things lightly and still be really deeply aware of everything going on in the room and being really professional and in charge of the class, but it doesn't look like that to the students. Like, I think that's the thing, isn't it, of any profession. When someone's good at it, they make it look easy. And maybe that's something to aspire to, is, yeah, is that thing of making it look like and feel like it all just kind of unfolded by magic and it all looked kind of easy. And obviously that takes practice. So if you're early in your teaching career, then yeah, you probably do need to do quite a lot of lesson planning because it takes time to build up that bank of experience to then be able to be more free flowing with it. But if you've been teaching for a good number of years, then maybe that's something you do anyway, but maybe that's something that you can try letting go of a little bit if you still feel the need or there's anxiety around making a very detailed lesson plan. The other thing that can bring some fun into your class is switching things up a little bit and seeing what could be maybe a more playful way of developing a skill or teaching something. And it might be an idea even just to observe, and there's some stuff online as well, maybe kids classes, the way they teach yoga, and then make it a little bit more fun and a little bit more playful. So I'm not saying that we literally do the same things, but there may be little ideas there about how to warm up for a particular pose or how to make a pose a bit more fun. So that is a little bit more lighthearted. So in my chair class, for example, and again, this isn't classic traditional yoga, but it was very useful, I felt. I like to do quite a lot of footwork to maintain mobility in the feet and ankles, and to get the toes working. So we had a class where we brought in handkerchiefs or very light scarves and asking people to pick them up with their toes. And so that sort of became a bit of a game for them. It's like, can they pick up these pieces of cloth with their toes? But it was getting them to work their feet in the way that I wanted, because I'd noticed before people getting a little bit frustrated about their toes not responding very well or not being very mobile. And I was trying to think of ways to encourage them to do this a bit more, and more with the idea that this is something they could do at home. That could be fun, that they could enroll other members of the family in, and gradually upping the difficulty. But there's something about that playfulness, rather than always being about, very precise placement, alignment. And these things are important too, but I think there is a place to bring in a bit of looseness and a little bit of playfulness where things are a bit less precise, but it's actually developing other skills that then are useful later on. And it just brings to mind now, I remember when my daughter was in nursery, and the teachers there were explaining that they did a lot of play with plasticine and modeling clay, because it built up the muscles to enable them to be more proficient writers later on. They needed the dexterity and the strength in their hands. So rather than at the age of 2, just trying to teach them how to write, they gave them something else that developed the strength and capability to then do the thing. And I think we can do that in our classes, that we can introduce something that's not textbook yoga, that's perhaps a little bit more playful and a bit more fun and lighthearted. And while your students are having fun, they're building up perhaps the strength and mobility to then do some other postures. So that might be another way that you can just bring a little bit more fun into your teaching. And there might be readings that you want to use in class, again, that are perhaps not classic yoga texts, or perhaps aren't always so sort of deeply philosophical and meaningful. I mean, I love these too. That is more my leaning, but I'm aware in myself that it's good to shake things up from time to time with something that's a little bit more light-hearted, and it still has the same message perhaps of self-love and acceptance, or holding boundaries, or all of those things. But there are poems out there or readings out there that are a little bit more playful or light-hearted, or they've got a little bit of cheekiness in there that might make you smile, but the message is still really valid. And one thing I remember reading, again, it was on a thread on social media, and people were talking about readings in class. And one teacher said for April 1st, for an April Fool's, that she read the Jabberwocky as the closing poem during final relaxation, and that she read it in the same kind of soft, relaxing tone that she would for her other readings. And just to bring in something that was just a little bit more playful and unexpected. And yeah, that was something I thought was quite genius. So there are ways of just lightening things up a bit, or switching things around a little bit, keeping it a bit more fresh and fun and interesting for you and for your students. And as a closing thought, I think it might be worth, if you're at a point where you're just feeling a bit, perhaps flat or uninspired, or not really in love with your teaching job right now, just to look a bit broader in your life overall, and maybe, again, as part of that self-care check-in, are you having fun in life at all? And I'm really conscious of how easy it is, because life is demanding, and particularly if you have other responsibilities, that life can very much be about caring for family members, doing your job, running a house, balancing your finances, planning ahead, and we're doing all the jobs and keeping the wheels turning, and then you suddenly realize, like, hey, there's no time for me just to have fun, to do something that has no other purpose than enjoyment. And it's quite easy to get caught into feeling like everything that we do needs to be useful or productive. And that might be something that's worth looking at as well. And if that is the case for you, then I really encourage you to carve out a little bit of time. It doesn't have to be lots. And put some things in the diary so that you have some fun stuff to look forward to. And sometimes these experiences, whether that's going to a music gig, whether that's going to a comedy night, whatever it is, where you can just kind of let loose a little bit and have some fun and have a laugh with friends and just have a good time, that's just going to help bring that balance into your life and kind of fill your pot of light-hearted joyfulness that you can then share with other people. So yeah, as a summary for today, I think just checking in about the perfectionism, the fear of criticism, writing that checklist of what it means to you to be a professional yoga teacher. Check, first of all, is that a reasonable list that you could apply to every other teacher that you know, and hold them to those standards and not feel like you're being unreasonable? And then that can be your little sanity check for times when you're feeling fearful of not being good enough or not being professional enough, or whatever it is, that you can check in is like, am I doing all these things? Yes, well then I'm fine. And then, yeah, some ideas around loosening up in class a little bit from time to time. So trying to not plan too tightly. Maybe try occasionally co-creating a class with your students, a bit more of a workshop style, bringing in some activities or exercises that are a bit fun and playful, maybe changing your language a little to bring in a little bit more jokiness or lightheartedness. And then looking at your own life and seeing, are there things that you need for yourself for you to have a bit more fun? And then when we ignite that kind of fun and joy for life in ourselves, then it's so much easier to share that with other people. So I hope that's given you some food for thought and permission to play and have fun. It's a lovely time of year to be doing that as well. You know, with that spring energy is a more youthful energy. So tapping into that, and yeah, connecting with your inner kid and having a bit of playtime for you too. So I'm going to wish you a lovely rest of the week, and I'll look forward to connecting with you same time next week. Thank you.